At the centre of my world at the moment is campaigning for women across the globe, but particularly women in the UK struggling in the workplace with endometriosis, because I unfortunately was sacked from my job with no notice, and it has changed my life. It's the kind of pain that, until you've had that level of pain, you don't even know what it feels like to experience that. I was told that I needed immediate surgery. It was one of the worst days of my life. These global corporates, they want to hold a lot against you if you can even think about challenging them. Over 200 pages of witness statements from colleagues that I'd worked with for years, who then basically said I was maybe always a poor performer.
Welcome to the 51%, the podcast where we cut through the noise and get back to basics when it comes to women's health. Through expert insights and powerful personal stories, we help you tune in to what really matters: your body, your well-being, your life. No one-size-fits-all advice, just real conversations to help you understand your health on your own terms. But before we dive in, I have a quick favour to ask. Please hit subscribe and join the 51% community on our website. It's free and it helps us grow, reach more women and create events that really speak to the health and wealth challenges we all face. And finally, just so you know, everything shared on this podcast is for information only. It's not medical or financial advice, and always speak to a qualified expert for support. Sanju, welcome to the podcast. It is fantastic to have you on. Thank you for joining me today. Could you please introduce yourself?
Thank you, Shreya, for having me. First time in a podcast studio, feels very special. So I'm Sanju. I guess I've recently become known for being this sort of Endo Warrior within the workplace space. But, before that, I love maths. I did a maths degree. I became a teacher on the Teach First programme. I joined Accenture, and at the same time I set up my charity Rise that operates in rural West Bengal. I play the violin. I'm a poet. I have lots of, interests. Recently launched this initiative called the Bengali Story because I am a very proud Bengali woman. But of course, at the centre of my world at the moment is campaigning for women across the globe, but particularly women in the UK struggling in the workplace with endometriosis, because I unfortunately was sacked from my job with no notice, and it has changed my life.
I just want to say, first of all, when I first read about your story, your journey, I was just in awe. I just thought, wow, it's so courageous to go against corporations. That is one thing. And especially a large corporation like Accenture. So I just want to rewind a bit now and talk about the beginning of your journey. When did you start noticing the symptoms of endometriosis?
The real turning point was summer 2018. But like conversations I've had with many women now, it probably started a lot longer than that. I didn't necessarily talk about heavy periods and bleeding through and really terrible pain. We just kind of carried on. But in the summer of 2018, it got to a point where it was unbearable. And it's the kind of pain that, until you've had that level of pain, you don't even know what it feels like to experience that. And I couldn't cope. Initially, my GP thought it was a urine infection. I've heard that is something that a lot of women experience when they go to the doctor. Maybe it's just a UTI. I think I waited probably about 2 months too long. And then when I eventually used the private medical healthcare that I was on at the time, I was told that I had endometriomas, so cysts on my ovaries. One of them was 7.5 centimetres, and the radiologist said it was the size of a Coke can. It's this real sort of visceral feeling of like knowing something is growing in your body that is huge, and it's kind of an out-of-body experience. And I was told that I needed immediate surgery. So my journey was quite different to other women in terms of being diagnosed after, as we know, an average of 9 years and then 11 years for ethnic minorities. I was diagnosed pretty quickly and I had immediate surgery.
And that is probably perhaps due to the fact that you did have private medical, so it was a much quicker turnaround. As we know, the waiting lists for gynecology, they're so long now, and they've obviously got worse after COVID as well.
Yeah.
Right. So you mentioned your symptoms. So in 2018, it was a case of heavy periods. Did things change and get worse? You said you had a lot of cramping. Was there anything else?
Yeah, it wasn't just heavy periods, and it wasn't just excruciating pain. It was a level of fatigue that's indescribable. I also had symptoms that I think were kind of similar to maybe being pregnant. So I was experiencing nausea, a loss of appetite, bloating, very sensitive breasts, just my whole body felt inflamed. And that makes sense now. It's a whole body inflammatory condition. And it's interesting that, I mentioned private medical healthcare because, of course, when I was sacked from my job, my private medical healthcare stopped overnight. And I cannot express the fear that I had not knowing if I was going to be supported as quickly as I had been the first time around, because you always fear having to have surgery again.
Yeah.
That's the constant worry. When you've got pain, you're thinking, is this flare up going to turn into something that needs immediate surgery? And it's a horrible place to be. So these continuous symptoms, even today, I'm not feeling that well. We're going through a heat wave and everyone is sort of struggling with the heat. But then there's another layer of, the inflammation and the fatigue. So it's a really challenging condition that is kind of unpredictable as well. So you don't know how you're going to feel tomorrow. You don't know if the flare-up is going to last for a few days. Is it going to last for a week? And at the time, it was a complete shock to me because actually I didn't really know much about endometriosis. I think the nation didn't know much about endometriosis in 2018. But I struggled with that diagnosis. I struggled to hear that, it was going to risk my fertility and that it was a lifelong condition that was not curable. And I think any woman going through this, my heart goes out to you because it is a lot to take when you do get the diagnosis.
There are lots of other things as well, mental health as well.
Yeah.
And then obviously being South Asian, there'll be stigmas. Can you talk a bit about that, how you kind of navigated all of that, I guess?
Yeah, my mental health wasn't great at the time of the diagnosis, I'll be honest. I was really, really struggling anyway, and I was going through counselling. But I think what's interesting is that I kind of almost compartmentalised this condition. I ignored it as well. I kind of said, well, I've just got to carry on. I've got to perform. And that's when you talk about sort of South Asian culture. I think, I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing all the time. I think that's what gives us our get up and go and our ambition. And it was instilled in me from a young age. But to not prioritise health, that's something I think is a fundamental issue in all of us. But I think there's another part of that, which is having the courage to talk about your health conditions in the workplace. That's not something back in 2018 that was happening. And so there was sort of already like the stigma and shame of talking about periods or talking about, an endometrioma. What is an endometrioma? Well, it's filled with blood. Do people want to talk about that in the workplace? Is that a conversation we're ready to have? So I felt kind of, uncomfortable doing that. And I didn't do it openly, particularly every day in the workplace. I probably masked a lot of my symptoms. I just wanted to demonstrate that I could be a high performer. And in hindsight, that was not the right thing. We have conversations now, in the endo community that's about raising your hand and saying, I'm struggling and I need support. And, it's a much better place to be because, as we know, hiding these symptoms or how we're feeling is, very dramatic in terms of our mental health decline.
What was the support like with your immediate family, your friends? Was it supportive, or was it again, I've spoken to a lot of South Asian women, especially, it can be quite a taboo subject and no one wants to talk about it and discuss it openly within the family, let alone with colleagues, right?
I'm kind of uniquely positioned here where I have one Asian friend. Actually, I have more Asian friends now, but I don't really have a South Asian community. My South Asian community is in India.
Right.
It's like me, mum, dad, sis. And in a way that's quite beneficial. I've heard stories which is very much like, you might go to a big Asian wedding and then be asked, what's wrong with you? Or, for example, why don't you have children? And I haven't had to experience that. So I've had a very different kind of cultural upbringing. And I was talking about this with my best friend. She's Caucasian. And she was saying, well, do you feel like we protected you in some ways? And I said, yes. You don't have that level of cultural, I don't know if the word is sort of shame and the stigma associated with it. So I can't speak to that. But what I can say is that, my immediate family and my immediate best friends from Camden School for Girls and people that I've met along the way. I mentioned some of the things before, Teach First, or even in the workplace from Accenture. They were there for me. They were supporting me through that. They knew I was going through something very difficult. And it wasn't them that was the issue. It was my workplace.
That is actually really refreshing to hear. Because a lot of the stories I've heard, especially in the South Asian community, there have been a lot of taboos, stigma and shame, and that can really impact your mental health. But yours was majority workplace related. Can you talk about that? Because I think what you have done is absolutely amazing.
Thank you, Shreya. And honestly, you saying that out loud means so much to me because it's been a long journey. It's been 7 years since I was sacked, but it was about 6 months before then that I'd been diagnosed and was going through trying to figure out how would I operate as a top performer in this organization whilst carrying endometriosis. Yeah. And I think initially I just had such faith and belief in the organization because I'd been there for 10 years. And so I was like, of course they're going to support me. That's obvious. There's no issue here, is what I really thought. Until I go back to work too quickly. I'm hearing from the client lead that she's not satisfied with my performance. She's not letting me work from home. I raise it to my line manager, who's a managing director, not really wanting to hear. I am putting my hand up to say I'm struggling. I'm writing emails to my career counsellor. That's another part of the organisational structure in terms of, you have a line manager, you have the head of the practice, but you also have another person, another layer of support who you can go to for these sorts of issues. I'm telling her as well, I'm struggling. I can't keep up. It fell on deaf ears. I came off the project. I went back on sick leave and I was off sick for another 6 weeks. And that is a long time. And you can imagine the kind of the fear, the guilt, the inadequacy that I felt. But I was like, no, this is okay. I'm going to get better. I came back on a phase return when I came back the second time, and it was a generous phase return. It was over 2 months. And so, of course, I was like, well, they're being amazing. That's such a generous phase return. And I also had a London restriction. And I talk about this because it's so important. I was told by the organisation that you don't need to travel up and down the country in your first client role. Amazing. Because anyone with endometriosis knows, particularly post-surgery, and if it's taken longer for you to recover, travelling is the worst. Yeah. But there were no roles in London. So now I'm just sat on the bench, as they say.
I'm so familiar with this, with this structure.
And as soon as you're on the bench, it's not good. But I've been off sick and I'm on a phase return and I've got this London restriction and I'm on the bench. So, and the organisation knows, this is what I'm telling myself, right? Yeah. Until out of the blue, a letter that says I'm not performing and that I might be dismissed in a meeting that they've invited me to 4 days later. I had no time to even have a conversation with them to say, well, have you been monitoring my performance? Have you put me on a capability process? Have you spoken to my recent line manager? Because what had happened was that I had been on the bench for quite a while, but then I took an internal role and I loved that role. Why? Because I had flexibility. And to your question before about how open was I about what was going on for me, no, I didn't tell the workplace that I was having naps during the day, but I was. It was the only way I could perform for the rest of the hours. But I was performing well. My line manager at the time was giving me good feedback. I was over 100% chargeable and they sacked me anyway. I don't know, I'm still in complete consternation.
Yeah, I know that process of being in the bench, and where I used to work, it was the same thing. How did it work out when they told you, you were letting you go? Then what happened after that? Because I know you fought back.
Yeah.
I don't know how long it took you to have that moment in your mind where you thought, no, I'm not going to stand for this, because it takes a lot of courage and a lot of guts to do that, for sure.
My God, it felt so daunting. And even now I think to myself, things have changed massively for me personally, mentally, physically, emotionally in 7 years. But I can remember that feeling of believing that this is a huge mountain to climb. And are you really going to be able to do this? And is it the right thing to do for you, for your family? But I think the thing that kept me going throughout was the sense of doing the right thing, the sense of justice. And that's kind of in my lifeblood. Honestly, when I eventually realized that I had no job, like I went on job seekers, it's like, I can't put up with this. I can't just take this lying down. So I appealed internally. Now, I still had hope. I still had such faith that, okay, a small group of people got it wrong. Let me appeal. Let me submit. Again, all the medical evidence, demonstrate to them how I've been struggling, what I've done to overcome that. Yeah. And I'm sure they're going to listen. And it was one of the worst days of my life. The internal appeal hearing was literally the most devastating experience. It was 2 hours and I was grilled within an inch of my life, and I will never forget it. Oh my God, it makes me emotional thinking about it, honestly. It was a managing director who I had belief in. There was an HR director, and my dad came with me, and they just, I don't know how to put this, they just didn't want to listen to me. It was like they were already so defensive. I think of an appeal hearing, you hear the evidence. It's got to be a balanced review of what I'm saying. That night, I had my first panic attack. I don't know, even express to you how difficult that night was. I was replaying those words in my mind over and over and over again. And that's because when you've been at an organization for 10 years and you've given it your life, and that's what I did, I loved it at Accenture. I gave it everything, not just my day-to-day, my side of desk, community work. The fact that they supported Rise so massively. I had a volunteer team in the analyst consulting group. I had managing directors who were trustees of the charity. It was embedded in my life. It was my everything. It was my sense of belonging. It was my identity. It was me. So after that appeal hearing, I pretty much knew that they were going to uphold their original decision and not give me my job back. And I think at that point I might have considered, in fact, not might have, I wanted my job back.
Yeah.
I thought I would still be employed by them. And when the letter came upholding their original decision, pages and pages about, well, how terrible a performer I was and how they could never take me back, basically.
Wow.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had a lot of counselling.
Yeah, I can imagine. So I was just going to ask you, that obviously must have taken a huge toll on your mental health. You know, you said you had counselling, I know you had a lot of support with your friends and your family as well, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people don't get that.
Absolutely.
But then how did you get through that to the other end?
So much darkness in between, Treya, I have to be honest. I think the first maybe 3 months was sort of denial that it had happened. I even went away. I went on holiday. This hasn't happened to me. I'm fine. And then it was no, a plummet into darkness, probably exacerbated by the internal appeal hearing and hearing from my GP that it was a panic attack. I think when you hear from your doctor, without a doubt that was a panic attack. And now things are going to change for you. We need to be careful about your diet or your caffeine intake or the amount of sleep that you're getting. And I started experiencing terrible insomnia. I would be up until it was light again. It was like I had this constant fear.
Yeah.
And I started having night terrors and things that I'd never experienced before because it was like my nervous system couldn't handle this onslaught. And I think that's what it was. It was an onslaught. It was a character assassination. It was an unpacking of Sanju Pal in a way that I never knew myself. And every time, and that's what I would say to anyone going through legal proceedings, it is not for the faint-hearted. Because you will get a response from the other side's lawyers and it could say anything about you. It could contain another document that they've picked out of somewhere. And suddenly you're like, oh my goodness, what is going on? Who am I? And that's what I worked on my counsellor with. The first ever session I had, and that was literally later on in the year in 2019, if I'm not mistaken, I told her, I was like, my life is ruined. My career is ruined. And we've worked from that place of believing that life isn't worth existing because it's over for you, to actually, no, let's figure out who you are, strip apart your identity, figure out where does your self-esteem and confidence come from. And I think that's a real learning journey for me. And interestingly, because I used to be a teacher and I, learned things about the formative years we know are the most important, but you build your confidence and self-esteem by the age of 5. And my parents said, my sister did a grand job. So I was always there. I just needed to remember. But it was a very uncomfortable journey. Times when I just wouldn't get out of bed, days, weeks. And the thing is, it wasn't just the mental health, it was carrying the condition as well. So I struggled for a large part, but then there was always a little ray of light that came out, another little bit of determination, another layer of resilience that came through with hard work. But my friends saw me in all states, and I'll always be grateful because they got me through.
After that point, what gave you even more courage to carry on and say, no, this is injustice. I'm not taking this. It's not just me. I'm sure there's hundreds of women in the workplace going through, if it's not endometriosis, it could be something else, right?
Yeah.
What gave you that moment in your mind to fight back?
And it's not hundreds, is it? It's not even 100,000s. It's millions of women in this country right now struggling in the workplace, whether it be for endometriosis or indeed any gynecological condition, from menopause, perimenopause, PMDD, PMOS, PCOS, adenomyosis. The list is endless, and it is through every part of our life. And for me, the real turning point was, it was actually doing the full hearing, and I haven't spoken about this much. So in May 2022, so this is now coming up for 3 years since I was sacked, finally, my chance to go into a courtroom and used my voice. And I was on the stand for 2 days. And that was an experience, honestly. And I felt so empowered. And I had best friends in the courtroom. At that point, no one really knew me. So we didn't have, I think we had the local ham and high. And I remember Charles was so lovely and he was really interested in my story. But it was my family, my friends, my legal team there through it all. And can you imagine? I was in a courtroom in front of a judge and 2 other panel members speaking my truth. And it was truth. And I was on oath. And
wow.
Yeah, that was the turning point for me.
So you after they provided all that evidence and said, no, we're not having you back,
Yeah.
in basic terms, I guess. Did you say, no, I'm going to take you to court now then, basically? Is that how it works?
Yeah.
I'm just kind of running through the process.
Yeah, of course. So when I was eventually told that I'm not going to get my job back, that was when I realised I needed to go further. And going further meant submitting a claim to the Employment Tribunal, which I did on the 19th of December 2019. And that's when the legal proceedings really started and all the paperwork. So when I was talking about the evidence and the witness statements, there was a lot of work. And I worked very closely with my lawyers. I also did a master's in law because I was actually thinking about becoming a solicitor. That's how much I was wedded to this cause. And at the time, it was just fighting for myself. It wasn't at that point this crusade for the nation.
Yeah.
But it became that after I had the full hearing. So I used my voice on the stand. I'd had to meet and see all these colleagues who'd written all these words about me face to face. Was quite a moment.
As you're speaking, I'm tensing up. I can feel myself tensing up.
There they were in all their glory. I had such faith in the tribunal system. I came out of that in May 22 being like, we've done this. We've done this. And when we got the judgment, family huddled round a video call with the lawyers and they were like, it's not good, Sanju. And our hearts dropped. I won on unfair dismissal, but my compensation was reduced to 100% and we lost on disability discrimination. We did actually also make a claim for race discrimination. We failed on that, but we didn't appeal on that. And that's something that I do want to talk about at a later date. But, the focus very much is disability discrimination due to endometriosis and the fact that my compensation was reduced by 100%. So we appealed that. And that's when it became greater than me because I realised that it's a corporate beast that is sticking to their laurels fine. Yeah. But now we're in the court of law. This justice system is there for a reason. I say the law is there to protect us, and you haven't. I can't even begin to tell you. That summer of 2022, so we had 6 weeks to turn around and appeal. Reading the judgment, it's 54 pages of annihilation. Honestly, it's the worst thing anyone could read about themselves, and I had to pore over it with my legal team to then put our appeal together. We waited a year. We got a rejection. Another battle. We have a right to a 310 hearing. That means that even if your appeal is rejected in the court of law, you can ask for an oral hearing. Another year goes by. We're now in 2024. It's been 5 years since I was sacked. And we have an oral hearing. And that is when I was like, I need to raise my voice. And that's when I wrote my crowd justice page, because I realized that also financially, my family couldn't keep going. This was hard-earned family savings.
I was going to ask about that, actually. How was this funded? Because this is like a costly thing to do.
It's the fact that my family believe in social justice over anything else. We still have our 2-bedroom council estate home. That's us. We don't have all the luxuries that maybe particularly predominantly Asian families feel they need to. That's their status. That's something I'm aware of. But we decided to spend that money on a cause that was going to hopefully do some serious, tangible, systemic change. But it got to the point where we needed help. So I put the crowd justice page together, and that was for me a huge moment. Like pressing go live on that, the scariest thing I've ever done. But since then, we're almost coming up to 2 years, and what a journey it's been since then. What a community there is in this country for women with endo, but not just that, Any woman who has expressed any level of solidarity with my case and my story, I cannot express how much you've helped me, because it was such a big moment for me.
That is amazing. Absolutely amazing. It's the power of community. When people can relate even a tiny bit,
Yeah.
they want to help because they feel a part of that as well. And I just think that is fantastic. What happened after that then?
We had the 310 hearing in 2024, a chance to give an oral submission about why we are appealing the judgment from May 2022. And we had a judge who heard us, who listened, who believed that there were merits and allowed the appeal. Again, restoring some faith in the justice system in this country. And that's when the work really began, because, my legal team were like, this is amazing. We got through on all three grounds related to the 100% reduction, related to, and I think you'll find this interesting, of course, the up or out model, the corporate model that was used to dismiss me because apparently I wasn't a top performer because I wasn't promoted within a certain amount of time. And then endometriosis, a disability. So we had three grounds of appeal that proceeded. We eventually got a hearing date. And that was a year later, on the 9th of December. And by that point, I was like, okay, I've done a crowd justice page. I'm now going to share my story. And I started doing the thing that people are really good at, that I'm not so good at, which is doing like reels of themselves talking. And I really put myself out there. I was like, I'm going to do 1-minute videos about the case. And it still was like, I don't think anyone's that interested, Sanju. Like, it just wasn't getting any traction. But I kept persevering. I was like, no, I want to fill that courtroom. That's what my aim was, to say that I'm not on my own anymore. We've got a community. And I know they're waiting to hear the outcome of this case, because we're now in a higher court. It's the equivalent of the High Court, the Employment Appeal Tribunal. This verdict was going to matter, particularly if you have endometriosis. And so we had the full hearing on the 9th of December last year, 2025. So much support in the room. Oh my gosh, like, wow. Judge Taylor, 2 panel members. And the scary thing is you never know how it's going to go. And I don't know, for anyone that has experienced their own case, it is very, very daunting, very scary. It's mainly the law, right? It's legal jargon, some of which I'm now familiar with. But, I had friends who were like, which way is it going to go? You just can't tell. It's like, well, no, because both sides are submitting their evidence and their case, and then we just have to wait. That was agony. It was over Christmas and New Year. And then finally, the 19th of January this year. Oh my God, I'm going to get emotional. Oh my God, we won. We won on all three grounds.
Wow.
I haven't shared the story in this level of detail. And I'm really glad I'm doing it with you, because I'll never forget that reaction that you had when we met back in February. You were amazing. You were like, that's you. And I was like, that's me.
Yeah. The reason why, when I saw you, I recognized you, and I was really inspired by your story. I don't have endometriosis. I don't have adenomyosis. I don't have any gynecological issues, and I never have in the workplace. It takes a lot to go up against a corporation that big. It really does. I would never have been able to do it. I know that. So that is why I was so in awe of you and what you had done. I just thought, my God, this woman has done this, and it must have taken so much out of her, mentally, physically, everything. And she's done it, and she's doing it. And that's why I had to come up to you.
And I'm so glad you did. But, and I think, but that's where we kind of have that affinity with one another. Because I think if you've worked in the corporate world, you know how hard it is. You put everything into, and the performance management process is brutal. Yeah. I didn't realize it was quite as brutal as, them being sacked. But at the time, you give it your all because you want to be rated well. You know that you're going to be ranked against
that number one.
Ranked against each other. And you know that from day one. But I think the whole thing that has kind of stood out now is that it isn't just these global corporates for management consultants or accountancy firms in the finance world. I'm hearing from women across the UK, whether it be in retail, whether it be in any industry, they are suffering. And we literally have a crisis on our hand in this country. And I feel like the case has awoken the nation in many ways to what it means as a woman to fight for your rights in the workplace and know that you will be supported. There is a voice there that's there to help you. And I had never imagined that I would be that voice. And I'm so grateful that I kept going. And that's with a great support system, with with this firm belief in truth and justice. And that's what keeps me going even now.
What did winning look like? What did that mean? What was the outcome of that, basically?
Yeah. Gosh, winning is such a word that, we've grown up, it's like, I don't know, within sports or just like to be a winner. And it was my lawyer who was like, we've won. And just hearing that, I was like, we've won. He was like, we've won across the board. And I was like, you're joking. So what does that mean? I'll start with the endometriosis. That third ground means that endometriosis should be considered a disability under the Equality Act 2010. That means an employer cannot shirk their legal responsibility. If a woman comes forward and says, I'm disabled due to endometriosis, they need to assess medical evidence. They need to provide a reasonable adjustment. They need to support. They cannot just say that they don't know what endometriosis is. It can be a disability under the Equality Act 2010. And an extension of that is, for me, it was disability discrimination, something arising from. It can get quite complex talking about disability discrimination, but at a basic level, say I'm on a London restriction and there are no roles available to me. Is it my fault, therefore, that I'm not chargeable? Or is penalising me for that and sacking me for that something arising in consequence of my disability? That's the basic way of putting it. So that's the third ground, but a very important ground. Then there's the up or out model. So challenging this corporate model that hasn't been challenged before, the judgment basically says it's not necessarily a fair capability reason to dismiss someone under the up or out model. And if we put it into lay terms, they could have given me more time. They said, oh, you haven't made senior manager within 4 years, so therefore you're out. That would be like a teacher being sacked for not making head of department. It's crazy that this model has never been challenged, and winning on that ground. And I think that's the ground that, is very interesting if you are in the corporate world. It's huge. And then the first ground, which is, it's very legal. It's the reduction in compensation. It's called the Polke reduction, that probably you and I don't care about, but the whole legal world is like, oh my God, the Polke reduction.
Never heard of it.
Exactly. Who has?
What is that?
So the Polke reduction means that when they upheld the fact that I was unfairly dismissed and then they reduced the compensation, they said that they reduced the compensation because I would have been dismissed anyway. If you unpack that, what the law says is that you have to provide evidence. The employer has to provide evidence to demonstrate that they would have used a fair capability process that would have dismissed you anyway, and they didn't do that. It's quite technical, but it's really important. And every day in this country, employment tribunals are using the Polke reduction. And so basically, it's important that my case is setting legal precedent in that area. So it's changing the law. It is changing the narrative for people in the workplace struggling with chronic health conditions. It is challenging what the corporate system looks like. And now it's taking it further to Parliament so that legislation changes that are for all gynecological conditions. And that is, for me, that is a win. It's a win for us all.
It's huge. I am really, truly inspired by what you've done, but I just find the whole thing, just the courage to do that, because it takes so much courage.
Yeah.
It's not something for the faint-hearted. No. Absolutely not.
I don't think it is for everyone to have to do it. I don't think we should. And
it just takes one person, and that was you. That was you.
Thank you, Shreya. I mean, it's horrible to think about the number of women in this country right now who are either being called into a meeting like I was to be dismissed, who are having their reasonable adjustment request rejected, who are being harassed because they're taking time off work for endometriosis or indeed any gynecological condition. It has to be a road that we go down now where this is not something we stand for anymore. and it needs to permeate every size of organization in every industry. And that's where having a conversation with you means that a few more people are going to hear this story, and a few more employers are going to think, oh, hang on a second. And actually the bigger, picture here is that we just need to change the whole narrative around what it means for a conversation between an employee and an employer.
Yeah.
So you talk about courage, and I understand, I didn't necessarily have that courage 7 years ago. When I was faced with this managing director and an HR director, two very senior people at Accenture UK Limited, I didn't sit there and say, well, you've pulled me into a meeting. That's unlawful, let me tell you, under the Employment Rights Act. And actually, I'm disabled under the Equality Act 2010. So I know for a fact that you cannot dismiss me. I didn't say that, did I? But I hope any woman listening to this now will have the courage to say this. There's no room for fear, because the law is there to protect you. And you have a case precedent now, Pal versus Accenture. I hope that it's just the beginning of a ripple effect to change, like I said, that narrative between an employee and an employer. And there are so many organizations already demonstrating what best practice looks like. And we need to see more of it. And we need to see it within these corporate giants, hence the whole David and Goliath.
So what's next?
I think the first thing I have to share is the what next is for everyone in this country to get involved in, which is an inquiry. A parliamentary inquiry has just been launched into endometriosis in the workplace.
Okay.
Now, that means that anyone with endometriosis can submit evidence about their experience at work. Huge. Huge. A chance for everyone anonymously. So if you are a little bit scared, you don't need to put down the name of your employer, but you just need to share how you are coping in the workplace. An open call. It closes on the 24th of July.
Okay.
And we have millions of women in this country with endometriosis. We should have millions of submissions. Parliament need to know that it's a huge crisis for these women.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. And I'm so excited. And I already know that recommendations are going to be out on the 14th of October. So it's not like we have to wait years.
Yeah.
It's a few months away. It's this year. Yeah. It's happening this year. Yeah. The second thing that's obviously so important to me is that the Equality Act 2010 has very loose guidance, I would say, around which conditions can be considered as a disability in their guidance under recurring and fluctuating. And I am campaigning to get endometriosis and other gynecological conditions listed. And I started a petition which within a handful of days got the minimum 10,000 signatures to get a government response. Yeah. We still wait for that. Now, we could debate this in Parliament, but we'd need 100,000 signatures. And again, this is where I say the power of community. If you believe that you are being penalised in the workplace because your condition is not being recognised, because it's not formally recognised in the guidance, then sign the petition. Because in this year, we will see tangible change in the Equality Act 2010, and that is huge. Now, the big thing that is challenging to say, but I need to say it nonetheless, is that Accenture have appealed the judgment and the appeal has been granted. And so my case continues in the Court of Appeal on the 10th and 11th of November. And this is challenging every single one of our rights. This justice that was shown to us on the 19th of January this year is at risk. And so we need to fill that courtroom. We need to make it clear that this is an issue that cannot just be overlooked because a global corporate giant believe they can challenge it. They are not above the law. And so I have been working very hard with my legal team to help us get ready for that. And it is not something I expected, and it is very difficult. But do you know what this shows you? And I've just thought it just now. I mean, I wonder if you think this as well. That's how important this case is to them and the corporate world.
When you say that you want submissions from women, it's not just women that work in the corporate world. It is women working in any, like you said, retail, for a supermarket, for an estate agent.
Absolutely.
Anything, right?
Anything.
So I just want to get that across, because I don't want to put out a message that it's just women working in the corporate world. No, this is any woman working for any company, however large or small, whether it's a startup or whether it's a huge corporation.
Absolutely. And I'm really glad you asked that question, because actually it goes a step even further to say that you might not have a diagnosis of endometriosis. You might have suspected endometriosis. You might have terrible periods and be thinking, could it be endometriosis? You might not have even spoken to a GP or a medical professional yet. But if you are a woman with endometriosis, you can submit evidence on this survey. So the all-party parliamentary group inquiry into endometriosis in the workplace is open to anyone and everyone. And this is such an important point in our history, because recommendations coming out of that will change things for all of us in this country.
That is fantastic. I hope to have you back on, because obviously there's a part 2 coming now. There is definitely a part 2. It's almost like a Netflix episode. This could be a Netflix documentary. But yeah, I think it's amazing. You will get the support, because there are millions of women around the UK going through gynecological issues for sure. And I wish you well. Sanju, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
And Shreya, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to share my story. It means the world to me. And for this podcast and everything you're doing to help elevate our stories, you're a very, very special person, and I'm appreciative of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.